I'm now moving on to making some trim for the gown. As you can see here, this is what I plan to make, except I'm going to make it out of a pale pink cotton. I already took my measurements, and so I've had to make my trim about 7 centimetres wide. I've also cut the edge with some pinking shears so it looks a bit more decorative, but I'll be putting some lace on the edges anyway afterwards. You don't have to do this, you can do whatever you like, but you just want to have a look, see how I'm doing mine, then you can follow this. I will be gathering it on the back, but it's not the usual gathering stitch that you do, so I'll just show you how to do that in a moment. I've also took my measurements on my gown. I measured from centre all the way around and down to the floor here, right down to the end, and that will give you your measurement for half your gown. So just times that times 2 and you'll know what the measurement is around the whole of your gown. Now mine comes to just over 3 meters. Now because I'm going to be gathering it, I need to obviously double that and maybe add a bit. So I've cut out a strip, you can see here's quite a bit, that's about 7.5 meters long, joining several sections together. So what I'm going to do now is run that gathering stitch, but first of all you'll be folding it like so. There we go, I've just put some pins in there. When you run your gathering stitch, you'll be running it just 2 to 3 mil in from the edge. Don't put it right on the very edge. Say about 2 or 3 mils in, and you're running that along the whole strip. Now, I would do this in several sections, so when I reach my next seam, I think that would be enough just to gather one piece at a time. Because obviously you don't want to gather the whole strip in one go, because if it should break or snap, then you're in a lot of trouble and you have to do it all over again. I'm going to machine mine, but there is a hand method where you can do it, which will probably take you till Christmas. But then if you've got till Christmas, then fair enough. That's all good. So this just helps me. I'm just pinning it as I go along, just to try and keep it in place for the sewing machine. I'm not going to do too much of a heavy gather, because if you gather it too much it can create a lot of bulk and be uncontrollable. So I'm probably just going to go for a light to maybe a medium gather. But say I've done it quite tight on this piece, and it doesn't really need to be like that, because as you can see it's just wanting to bunch up too crazy. So I'm just going to do that, and I'll see you in a bit. I meant to say at the beginning, when you sew your gathering thread, make sure you sew it on the side with your flaps facing out. Do not do what I did and sew it the other way around, so then your flaps would end up on the outside of your trim. Okay, grope over. Right, I'm just gathering it here. Now I'm not doing it too light, but I'm not doing it too bulky either. I've decided to go for somewhere in the middle, so that when it opens up, it is a little bit uncontrollable, but you just do it a bit at a time. It'll look something a bit like that. So as I said earlier, you just do this in sections. So I've gone just from one end here to where the next seam starts, and then I'm just pulling that in. As you can see, it does create a different kind of gather to if you just gathered it straight down the middle of a strip. So just enough. There we go, because if I say, I'll just show you what would happen if you really bunched it in tight. Not only does it make it harder to open, but it will just look like that, and it will just look like a big mess basically, so you don't want to do that. go, just enough to make it look pretty. I'm at the point now where I'm sewing on my trim that you saw me ruching earlier. I've just pinned it down in place. Now I want the edges to meet with the edge of the robe here. So I've just pinned it all along in place, and I've just started off here another section with some thread, and I'm just taking some of the fabric, and you've seen me do this before, just some of the trim, bit of the fabric, go through the trim. I'm not spacing this too widely because I want to make sure it's really anchored on good down the centre. It's a bit more time consuming, but it'll be a bit stronger afterwards. And I'm doing this for the whole of the gown. I'm now in the process of sewing down the trim onto the edge of my gown. As this is my preferred choice, what I would like to do with this, you can do it any way that you like. You can even have the frills sticking up if you want to. I've opted for flattening them down because I think it looks prettier. First of all, I've gone down the first edge of the gown, so I make sure that lines up nicely with the very edge. And then I'm coming down and I'm sewing down the other end, and I'm just putting some pins in to help me keep it under control. As you know, earlier when I showed you, it's a bit uncontrollable, but I'm going to then add some lace on afterwards. Okay, for people in England who know Blue Peter, well, here is my Blue Peter moment. Here's one I prepared earlier. I am doing my lace on the edges. I've chosen a lilac lace. I can just show you up close. And I've already gone round the whole side, this side, and sewn that on. I'm going to do the same on the edge here. Now, when I originally bought the lace, it was a double row like this. I'll show you a picture of it on the internet in a second where I got it from. So I've bought about 20 metres. I'm hoping that'll be enough. If not, I'll be buying some more. So basically it's about 14 millimetres wide, and I just cut down the middle with a pair of scissors. Just put that aside. And it's a bit hard to see, but I've run a gathering stitch all across the top here. Okay, so I just put a white sheet underneath it so you can see. So this will be one point where I start gathering, and then I've started again running another gathering stitch all the way along, just a metre or so. Until get to another part, and then I just stop. Do not run a whole gathering stitch across the entire length of lace of 10 metres that I've got here. You'll be cursing afterwards. You just want to do about a metre, then stop, and then run another gathering stitch so you can gather it in sections. Okay, so I'm just taking on tail at the end of my lace, and because it's quite a thin lace, it does drive you a little bit potty, but just be very gentle. This is why you want to do it in sections. So the thicker your lace, the more controllable it might be, and it does take a good couple of hours to do this very slowly. Try not to tug on it too hard because it will snap again, being a very thin and delicate lace. So you're just running those gathers, and eventually you'll get that nice little frilly edge that you saw on my dress earlier. Just a quick show now of the trim that I've just sewn on around the edges. I purchased my lilac lace from eBay and from this seller, Bazonza Craft Mart, and it does a different selection of colours. I chose the lilac one, and as you can see, this is what I mean by it comes double, so if you order 5 meters you're actually getting 10 when you've cut it down the middle, so it's quite good value. And depending how much you buy depends on the price. The most you can buy in one go is 10 meters, which was $6.99, so not bad, and that's free postage. So there we go, that's where you can buy the lace from if you want to do that for your own dress. I'll be back in a minute. Moving on to the next part of decorating my dress, I'm doing this little pleated trim. I shall just take you to my dress. I am just sort of playing with ideas at the moment, but that's what I'm sort of hoping to go for. So I'm just joining lots of sections of trim together. I've decided to go for approximately 3 centimetre wide trim, and I've used just about 6 metre long trim that's before pleating on just the one side, so I'm looking at probably about 12 metres altogether to do both sides. I've just started pinning my little pleats in place here, and it's not quite as time consuming as I thought it was going to be, and I'm doing this completely by eye. I'm not doing any measuring, it's just a little bit random. First of all though, I'm putting a bit of a weight on this to hold it as I go. You don't have to do this, but it helps me just put a bit of tension as I'm pleating on the rest of the trim here. Okay, I'm just doing this pretty random. I'm just taking a little bit and just doing little tiny pleats. I'm doing this completely by eye. See, I have not bothered measuring out because I'll be there till Christmas. Just make sure they're nice and tight. This is why I put the weight here, because it helps me. It might not help you, but it helps me. It is tricky because I'm only dealing with a very, very narrow piece. As said earlier, about 3 centimetres wide, so it's a little bit fiddly. Before I start sewing down my pleats, I find it quite helpful just to give it a press with the iron, just to help set the pleats in. Now that I've completed my trim, I want to do like a snake design going up, if that makes any sense. So it will sort of go something like that. And to help me, I've got these plates, and to get the outline, I'm just pinning around the outside of the plate, or it's nice and flat on the table. Going up to the top, you will reach some difficulty when you get to the top, so what I had to do on the other side is actually put the dress on and have somebody pin the rest of the design in place, because you've actually got to go over some of these folds. So it just gets a little bit tricky there, but I recommend putting it on because it's really hard to do it flat on the table. I wanted to have some even spacing between my swirls. I wanted it to be finished even at the bottom. So I've done mine about 4 centimeters in from the edge on every single one, and 6 centimeters between each one, like so. And in between I'm going to be putting these flowers, so I already measured it so it wouldn't get too close to the edge there. So there'll be like flowers at every point. Now you can see on my trim here, as it was very difficult to keep it in a straight line, and so it naturally wants to bend in a curve. You can just see it here, it naturally just wants to go around. So trying to get it to bend the other way creates bumps. Now you can actually, if you want to, take in excess at the corners, but that creates a big bumpy edge. So I came up with an idea to cut the trim and then turn the trim the other way to the way it wants to bend, so that I can keep it all flat. So you can see I've cut it here. Now I've got to rejoin it and put a seam back in place. So I just turn the trim over, and now you can see it wants to bend more easily that way, so I'll just rejoin that there, put a seam in place. Okay, so I've now rejoined it and I'm now continuing around the curve. Now again, I've reached the other side just before it starts to go into the curved bump here. I've cut it at this point, and you'll just repeat that process all the way up, like so. Okay, I've now sewn my gathered lace trim onto the pleated trim and started pinning it onto the dress in this S curve. When you get to the top here, it does get a little bit tricky because you have the pleats sewn in place. So what you want to do is to actually put the dress on, leave this bit loose, and have somebody pin it on so that you can keep all your pleats flat as you go. I'm just going to go ahead now and I might either just prick stitch it on in places just along, just so it's enough to hold it so you don't see any stitching. Okay, for my next stage of decorating the dress, I'm going to make these cute little swirly gathered things, and they're sort of going to go a bit like this and sort of stick up. Okay, to make them, I've made a piece of fabric here about 39 centimeters long by about 7.5 centimeters wide, and I've pinked all the edges with pinking shears. Next, I'm going to fold this in half and just put a pin, not too close to the edge because that's where I'm going to sew in a minute to do my gathering line. And I'll just continue that all the way to the bottom. Okay, So next what I'm going to do is run a line of machine stitching down here to gather it. At the end of your machine stitching or hand stitching, however you do it, always remember to leave your tails to pull the gathers in. Now this gathering is slightly different from just, say if I just gathered that down the middle, not on a fold. It is a bit more difficult to gather because you've got a folded edge, but it does create quite a different effect when you open it out as to a normal one layered machine gather. So I'm just pulling a bit, being careful not to snap your thread, or you'll have to do it all over again. We don't want that. When you've got your desired length, you can then just take your thread and sew off the end, tighten it off. I'm now sewing on these little frilly things that you saw me gathering earlier, and it was quite fiddly to do, but I've just put some pins to hold them, and I'm doing the opposite curves to what I've got on the outside here, and I'm trying to make them sort of look like they're following, but they're broken up at the same time. And I'm just doing the same method that I did before when you saw me sew this part of the trim on, which was the same kind of gather. I'm just whipping them on by going underneath, so you won't see any or too much sewing to the outside. And that's exactly the same way as I did before on the other trim. After I've sewn down my frills, I just want to give them a little tug and just open them out a bit. I'm not going to sew these flat down now. I want these to stick up and look really flouncy and pretty and fluffy. So I'll just do that with all the others. So it makes it just look like that. On to the next stage of decorating my dress. I'm making these little rosette type things with some frills on the edge. I'm starting out with a long strip, and I've sewn the lace about a quarter way in on the edge. The actual width of my strip I'm using is 4 centimetres. And measuring from one end to the other, 52 centimetres long. I then pinked with pinking shears all the edges. That was before I sewed the lace on. I'm then going on to pleating my trim. I'm doing all these nice little neat pleats. The same way that you saw me do that of a pleated trim on the main skirt earlier. So don't need to show you how to do that again, because I've already shown how to do that. I will then be machine sewing them all in place. Okay, I've now run my line of sewing. I've run the main line of sewing a bit further in. This line here is a gathering stitch, which is done a bit longer, and then at the end here I've left some tails to pull those gathers in, so that it helps pull it in the middle and make it nice and round, because at the moment you have a great big hole there. I did try a strip of fabric and then just gathered it without pleating, and it didn't have the same effect, and it looked a bit sort of lack of fluffiness, so as I like to call it. But run a gathering stitch, it makes it look quite nice. Okay, so I first of all gathered it in the middle and tied it off. I then took my two open ends here and just run a few little hand stitches down to make a seam. It's not too neat and tidy, but then it will look something like that. Sorry. And then eventually I'm going to put some kind of embellishment in the middle there. At this stage I haven't decided, but I will do so. So I'm doing about 10 of these. I've now decided to use the same lace to make some little decorations inside the middle. So what I've done is I've cut a piece of lace here. It's supposed to be about 33 centimetres long. I've then gone on the machine and I've run a gathering stitch, which I'm just going to pull now. Might take me a while, so I'll be back in a minute. Okay, you can see I've gathered that quite tight now. Gathered it down to about 9-10 centimetres. It is a little bit uncontrollable. I'm just going to tie that off now. Okay, I'm just going to seal up the gap a little bit on these before I sew the centre piece in. Just close it up a little bit. Okay, now I find the two ends of my lace and I hold those together. I then fold it again, and then you can see where I've just finished off the thread here, but closing that gap in the middle. Sorry, this is a bit fiddly to try and show. Just hold it down really tight and I go up one side. Just sewing down the edge. I'm making sure it's on really tight. I just pass the needle through to the other side, and notice some of the edges disappears a little bit, but it's okay. Just do the same again. Okay, then all you need to do now is just arrange it and fluff it up a little bit. Put it where you want it to be. I'm now making start on the front stomacher. As you can see here, I have a smaller one and a slightly bigger piece here. This will be my finished size. And what I've done is I've taken 2 pieces of fabric. I've got some canvas and some old curtain fabric, and I've run a boning channel down the middle just because I want it to stay a bit straight. And this will be my outer fashion fabric. I've made it 3 centimetres bigger all the way round to allow for turning in. But first of all, what I've had to do is run a gathering stitch around the outside here. And you just see here I've left my tail to pull that in. And I'm going to turn one edge 1.5 centimetres in. Next I need to start turning 1.5 centimetres in. That's why I've left more allowance on the edge of mine than you might need. When you get to the corner, to reduce bulk of turning in the edges, we've clipped across it like so. I'm sorry here, stepped a stage ahead a bit, but basically I've run a gathering stitch here and I've pulled in all this excess fabric and pinned it down in place. Next I have run a tacking stitch all the way around it to hold it in place. You don't have to do this, you might be more confident and more experienced to actually turn it twice. I feel more secure if I just ran a tacking stitch around it. I've now started to pin down the second turnover so it's nice and neat, pulling it reasonably tight as I go but not too tight. And then I've reached the bottom and I've run another gathering stitch along it, and I'm just pulling in those gathers now. So I just need to pull it in a little bit more and then re-pin it. And then pin those folds down again. I've now catch stitched the edge all the way around, and now I'm on to making these little tabs. Now it'll look like this, and this is where you slot your pins into when you're attaching it to your stomacher on your stays. I've just got this herringbone tape here. I've made mine about 6 centimetres long, and I'm first of all turning the ends in and then turning the other ends in like so. Okay, here we go, I've turned the ends in now so you can just see. I just want them to be a little bit neater, but it does make it a bit more bulkier. You don't have to do this, but I just thought it looked a bit nicer. And I'm just putting 3 each side. Skipping along here to the final item, I've added some trim with a double ruche each edge, a little lace bow in the middle, and a frill at the bottom. So that's that now finished. And this will just be pinned onto your stays, and then the robe will be pinned over onto the top of this.